Welcome to You Talk, everyone. Today, and for the next 5 episodes, we are going to discuss war, peace, and security. And today, we want to talk about what does war actually look like. Horst, take us away.
Excellent. So war has looked like many things over the years. Ultimately, warfare has been one of the leading drivers of technological innovation. If we hadn't have been busy trying to bomb the ever-loving shit out of Germany in the 1940s, the computers that you are watching these videos on may look very different. Had the research into ballistic missiles being conducted differently, we may not have put men on the moon. And the space race may have ended entirely differently. So, while I'm hoping in the coming videos to address what Australia faces in terms of threats to peace, coming to peace agreements and maintaining national security, and optimistically world security, we do have to just briefly step back because war involving Australia is a pretty recent concept. In ancient times, warfare was usually for resources or prestige. While we were off recording, Carl was referring to the concerns of empire when it came to Rome. Rome really did just bite off more than it could chew, but they also had semi-modern toilets, so there's something going for them there, right?
Yes, they also had heated floors as well.
Exactly. I don't even have heated floors. That's luxury.
I don't either.
Yeah.
God damn it, the Romans had it better than the average citizen today. That is not
The Romans had it better than the average citizen, provided you'd earned your way. Usually you'd have gone off to warfare, dragged half your bloody slaves with you, and fought, probably come back alive, and you'd be set. And that's one of the earliest examples of warfare being profitable. Warfare has been profitable forever. There is a quote attributed to one of the paper guys, William Randolph Hearst. You provide the war, I'll provide the pictures. Hearst understood that the US getting involved in war was a marvelous opportunity, because even if you're not the person selling the weapons, the armor, the tanks, you can sell the idea that a war is just to the public. We've seen time and again that if the public is riled up, they'll buy your newspapers. In fact, it's basically what Murdoch built his entire empire on. Okay, we'll try not to slag Murdoch too much here, even if he deserves it occasionally.
Occasionally.
What a war looks like has evolved so much over the last 10,000 years that it's worth constraining it to recent history. So some highlights are probably the Boer conflicts, in which Britain was fighting and discovered that if you give soldiers drugs, they care less about being shot. And then in World War II, we later saw this with both sides being issued amphetamines. So, nothing you learn is wasted. In World War I, Australia, as a newly formed country, a federation of states, was dragged off to fight in Britain's name in the cause of defending the empire. We lost some young men and traumatized some others because Britain wanted to remain relevant. These days, our treaties with other nations, primarily the US, mean that in just over 100 years, very little has changed. In World War II, Australians were bound by treaty to the UK and to a certain extent the US. The Australian theatre of war was basically Darwin. There was not very much in Australia that any of those combatants needed, other than men to soak up the bullets. Japan directly attacked Australia. And honestly, I don't even remember half the details because it fizzled. The issues of
I think you're
the
forgetting Port
atomic
Moresby.
devices.
There was that as well.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
although in Papua New Guinea, that was under Australian control back then. Effectively an
Right.
Australian exclave.
An Australian colony, kind of.
Yeah, kind of.
But what Japan ultimately was concerned with was the detonation of 2 nuclear devices over Hiroshima and Nagasaki that brought the war to a barbarous but very rapid end insofar as the Eastern Theatre. I don't remember. Did we? I'm pretty sure that we sent Australians to Korea. I'm pretty sure we sent Australians to Korea.
For the Korean War, I believe. Yeah, we did.
In Vietnam, Australians followed the US into the war. And Lyndon Johnson faced certain popularity issues as a result of committing to that warfare. It's said that the tide turned against him when Walter Cronkite, a journalist at, I think it was NBC or CBS, but he went over there with a news recording team. He spoke to generals on the ground. When people in the US saw footage of the conditions in Vietnam and the fact that even the generals weren't really convinced they should be there, support for the Vietnam War basically evaporated. Over here in Australia, there were people ahead of that time who were quite reasonably asking, why are we fighting the US's war? Why have they stirred up discontent and unrest and then taken us to clean it up? Warfare for Australia has historically looked like being expected to follow other nations into battle, to provide blood for the cause, to provide resources to keep a war machine going that doesn't directly benefit us. The flip side of this is that if Finland decided tomorrow that they wanted Australia for themselves, that Australia was going to be theirs, that they were going to try and emulate the Swedish Empire 500 years later, our allies, the US, New Zealand, Great Britain, Canada, would be very, very insistent about ceasing hostilities. They would use force if necessary to defend us, because the bilateral treaties we have mean that we use force to protect them and they use force to protect us.
Treaties such as the ANZUS Treaty.
Just so. But this is why I want to ask what war looks like. For Australia.
In recent years, you mentioned the Vietnam War. After that,
yeah.
Well, there's been more wars since then that we've fought as that we've been called on to fight as a part of the ancestry. The
Mhm.
Iraq War, the war in Afghanistan, of which it
The
was,
ongoing war on terror.
yes, the war that never ends.
It goes on and on, my friends. I remember reading a long time ago that the state of emergency declared for World War II in the US was never formally rescinded. Legally speaking, the United States has been in a state of war, a non-stop state of war, since 1941.
That's very interesting.
Obviously, they haven't called on us to provide military police to maintain martial law in New York, nor have they attempted to declare martial law here. Let's be real, with Joe Bjelke-Peterson at the helm, they wouldn't have needed to. And with Peter Dutton at the helm, they might not need to. But we know war as a function of other nations and the disputes of other nations. Australia has seldom been directly attacked. And had we not had these alliances with other nations, disputes involving Australia may very well have been hashed out by diplomats or even by commercial agreements. We've made a bed with our allies. We're lying in it. But Australia isn't the country that it was in 1901, or in 1914, or in
The world is different too.
1941.
And the world is different too. Other nations are a lot less likely to try and take any territory, let alone our territory. It's been perceived as a massive shock that Russia invaded Ukraine, because before that happened, it was almost inconceivable, especially for a more modern nation, to try and take territory from another modern nation.
We honestly thought that the concept of law, the concept of justice, even between governmental bodies, could present a Europe which did not face war. They managed it. For almost 60 years, Europe had no real conflicts to speak of. There
was the Balkans.
Genocide attempts. Yes.
There was the Balkans, but that situation's,
I would argue that wasn't a war so much as an attempt to crime writ large.
An attempt to what?
Crime. Genocide is not war, it's a criminal act.
Right. Yeah.
Europe was mostly peaceful for a very long time.
Mm.
And ironically, the actions of Putin may be pushing the last holdouts who believed that they didn't need to be part of large military alliances, that they were civilized and could handle matters further towards a global hegemony.
We're
And
seeing
in this time, Australia's
rebuilding.
changed.
And we're seeing a remilitarization in Europe. However, that's to face one threat. It still presents a very united Europe that doesn't want to go to war with itself. Where I'm like, even in all that, we're not seeing, say France and Germany or, Italy and that at each other's throats or threatening war.
Oh, trust me, they're at each other's throats all the time. But the difference is that when France and Germany are at each other's throats, it is not across a battlefield. It is not with trenches cut and young men sent out to die in the cold. It is people in suits screaming at each other across a table.
The civilized way of doing it.
Until they can figure out an agreement which makes them scream slightly less.
Like
it
Brexit.
Is an approach to a better world.
Yeah. It's ironically a still an exciting way of doing things, but a less deadly exciting way.
Yeah, it's certainly exciting if you're in the room, and we have seen before photographs coming out of the European Parliament, I believe, where parliamentarians have come to blows on the floor of Parliament. I personally think it's much more civilized that the leaders of nations duke it out than sending civilians to duke it out.
Yeah, I mean,
But
honestly, I've had the idea for a couple of years now that we should just have in every like parliament or congress around the world, there should be a boxing ring there.
if nothing
Uh,
else, it'd be a good way to work out aggressions. And then here's the thing: let's talk about Australia again for a moment, but not about warfare.
Actually, if I could say one thing, and this is about Australia, like I think this would be the approach to conflict that'd be best. You know, you have the boxing ring there, but let's look at Australia. After a fight, what do?
You buy your enemy a beer. You call it dealt
Exactly.
with.
Exactly.
That was what I was about to get to. This is a very Australian approach to problem solving. Someone says something you don't agree with. You square up, someone wins, someone loses, but at the end of the day, you call it done.
Exactly. Now we've run out of time. Actually, a few
We
minutes ago.
have,
Is there
but I
anything you
think
want to
we
say?
no, I think this sort of has covered the historical context of Australia at war,
Hmm.
which is what I really wanted to handle, because the next thing that we're going to be looking at is pretexts for war, provocations, which is a thing you
Hmm.
may have heard of in the news. And
Oh God,
also,
yes,
beyond that,
so
how we
much.
can negotiate our place in a peaceful world. It worked for Europe. Why can't we just make the idea larger?
Hmm.
There are a few answers to that, but in any
And
case,
kind of on that, but still on the on the subject of the context of Australia. In our modern context, there is even less reason to there is even less reason for other countries to take military action against Australia, especially our neighbors, and especially those who are any even remotely close to us.
yeah, Australia has the potential to be the capybara of the military and diplomatic world. You ever seen photos of capybaras?
They're
These are
chilling,
giant hamsters that will snuggle up with alligators, house cats, and like small birds.
and for the most part, they're completely unbothered, and almost nothing bothers them.
Imagine Australia as the capybara of the modern world. We could be it.
And on that note, I think
We'll see
we'll
you
end it.
shortly.
Catch you later.